Welcome to Blue Values TV. Today on Blue Values TV, we're talking with Derek Cressman, a candidate for Secretary of State in California with the Democratic Party. Stay tuned. Welcome to Blue Values TV. Blue Values TV is a production of the Blue Values Coalition. Blue Values Coalition is dedicated to informing, educating, and engaging our neighbors in the governance of our communities. Look for us online at bluevaluescoalition.org. Our guest today is Mr. Derek Cressman, a candidate for California Secretary of State. We're very pleased to have you with us today, Mr. Cressman. Welcome to the show.
Thank you, Jack. It's great to be here.
I'm so glad that you could find the time to meet with us. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're running for and what you see as the most important things for Secretary of State in California at this time.
Well, I'm running for Secretary of State in order to make sure that real people's votes matter more than corporate money in our politics.
That's a tough challenge.
It's a big challenge in front of us, and it's what I've spent most of my career working on. I've spent the last 19 years working professionally with nonpartisan good government organizations like Common Cause and the public interest research groups, and been working on voting rights and government ethics and on campaign finance reforms that will work to get the big money out of politics. And decided to run for Secretary of State after learning that California actually ranks 48th, if you can believe it, in a recent survey by the U.S. Census Bureau. We're 48th compared to all of the other states in terms of voter participation.
48th.
48th. So the good news is we're beating Texas. But the bad news is it's not just embarrassing from a state pride point of view, but there are very real-world ramifications in terms of our public policy by not having the full participation of all of the people in California. So we need to change that, and that's a big reason why I'm running.
The participation you're talking about is a combination of registration as well as turnout?
That's right. The 48th ranking is both numbers are factored into that, and we're lagging in both areas, in the registration area and in the turnout area. And the good news is there are some just purely mechanical pieces that we're on the verge of fixing to make it a little bit less bureaucratic to cast a ballot and to get registered to vote. So when I was working at Common Cause, we were able to get passed through the legislature some very significant reforms like same-day voter registration and pre-registering high school students to vote.
Now, is that in California?
Well, it's on the books in California, but it's not yet been implemented.
Right.
And that task will fall to the next Secretary of State. What's holding us back is we need to build a new statewide voter registration database in order to get these reforms implemented. And, you know, sadly, I've seen our last 3 Secretaries of State fail to get that done, and so we really need to make this a priority and have someone in that office who has both the policy background and the management skills to get these reforms into place.
Now, what kind of ideas do you have for getting increased turnout as well as registration? The same-day registration will help with the registration part of it, but how do you get voters interested in voting?
Well, one of the biggest reasons when you look at surveys of non-voters, as well as just, you know, when I've been out talking to folks, is especially here in California, where we have all these ballot measures, a lot of folks don't feel like they have adequate information with which to base a vote, or some of the down ballot races where you're voting for a judge or, you know, a county supervisor race, things like this. So the Secretary of State can help with that. One of the jobs of the Secretary of State is to mail out the official voter information guide.
Right.
A lot of viewers probably got this in the mail in the last 2 or 3 weeks. And right now, it's a thorough document, but it's not very engaging.
Right.
It's black ink on gray newsprint, and I think the state that invented the Apple iPhone and invented the YouTube video, we could do something a little bit more dynamic, a little bit more engaging and interesting, and provide better information. So I want to turn that document into a digital app that folks can get on their smartphone, on their desktop computer. We'll keep the newsprint version for folks who like that and want to get it that way.
And who don't have access otherwise.
Right. And we need to be building out our broadband access all across the state. We're
Right.
making big strides there, but certainly that's a priority that needs to get done. But once we create a digital version, we can do a couple of things. We can give every candidate for office a series of online videos that they can use to make their case, speaking in plain language directly to the voters. Here's what I am all about. Here's my campaign.
Let me switch to something that you did a while back, and a lot of people have heard about gerrymandered districts and stuff.
Yeah.
California went through an initiative process where we decided to have districts drawn by a nonpartisan commission.
Right.
You were involved in that. Can you tell us about that?
Right. Well, another one of the problems in encouraging people to vote is if they feel like the election has been rigged ahead of time through gerrymandering or other big money problems, they don't feel like their vote matters. And before, what we had in California was a process where the politicians drew the district line. So in essence, the politicians got to pick their voters
Right.
before the voters got to pick them. And it led to incredibly uncompetitive races where the results were basically a foregone conclusion. So Common Cause, where I was working at the time, it was a 40-year-old nonpartisan good government organization. We looked at that and said, why don't we take that process out of the hands of the legislature that has an inherent self-interest to
Absolutely.
protect their own districts and put it into the hands of an independent citizen redistricting commission. So we worked to draft Proposition 11, which was on the ballot here in 2008. The voters approved that. And then this last time, when we drew our new political districts, for the first time in the state's history, it wasn't career politicians drawing those lines, but ordinary citizens from both political parties as well as independents. And it's never a perfect process, but it was much better at protecting communities of interest instead of slicing and dicing them to serve the needs of incumbents.
Yeah, I can give one example is right here in Placer County. Placer County, in terms of a congressional district, is part of Congressional District 4. It used to be that congressional districts ran roughly west to east across the Sierra Nevada. Well, Congressional District 4 was created to run up and down the mountains and foothills and create a foothill type of a district. And that's a great example of a community that you talk about.
Right.
So that's the kind of change that's come about with this commission.
Yeah, and the Secretary of State actually does play a small role in forming this commission, and while it won't happen during the next four-year term of the next secretary, if that secretary is reelected, they will help form this commission. And one of the concerns I have about some of the other candidates running is they not only opposed the creation of this citizen commission, but some of them actually raised money to try to repeal it, even after the voters had put it into place.
Oh, okay. That's more interesting. That's unusual.
Yeah, so folks should take a look at that.
Yeah, definitely. Now, the biggest problem that a lot of people see is got to be money in politics, money in government. This is something that you've devoted a large part of your life to combating. Give us your thoughts on how much of a problem we still have. I believe you even wrote a book about this. And what can we actually do to reduce that influence of money?
Yeah, I wrote a book several years ago looking at the recall of Governor Gray Davis and the promises that Arnold Schwarzenegger had made to clean up money in Sacramento, and quite frankly, things have only gotten worse, and really dramatically so. The core problem that we have right now is that the candidate for the legislature who raises the most money wins 90–95% of the time. And what that means is the incumbents who are running need to spend a great deal of their time raising those funds, and they're not raising it from ordinary citizens. They're raising it from a tiny slice of the wealthiest 1%, from corporations that have a vested interest in what comes out of Sacramento. And so that means that our legislators are really no longer directly accountable to the voters, but they're in fact more accountable to the funders of their campaigns.
You mean these corporations don't give candidates money just because they're nice guys, huh?
In fact, it would be irresponsible for them to, right?
Right.
If you're the CEO of a corporation, you shouldn't be giving money just out of civic virtue or to advance a candidate that you personally like. What you should be doing is giving money to advance the financial interests of your
company.
Shareholders. And that's, of course, what they're doing. And what that means is that the narrow interests of corporations is winning out over the broader financial interests of us as taxpayers, as parents of children going to our schools, of just ordinary citizens in California.
But people have such a helplessness about this issue.
Yeah.
What can a person do when the very legislators that could make a change in this are the ones who got there through the influence of money?
Yeah.
It's not real likely that they're going to make changes in the system that has worked for them.
They're not unless we demand it. And
Right.
there's some things that we can do from a policy point of view that let's talk about. But before you even get there, we need to remember, this is our country. We, the people, founded this Constitution, and ultimately it is up to us how it's going to be run. And if we let other people take it away from us, that's our fault, not the politicians. So the first thing that any voter can do to blunt the impact of big money is turn off the TV ads, throw out the junk mailers, research for themselves who are the candidates that they want to support. Because if you're going out and getting your own information on candidates, you're far less likely to be misled by all of the mailers and the TV ads and the big money. So that's the first thing that we can all do, and then take that step to educate our neighbors, educate our family members, educate our friends about the issues and about the candidates. That's something that's within everybody's power to do to help take our government back.
But you're getting at one of the problems that, as Secretary of State, you can do something about. If you try to do this independent research into where the money is coming from for some of these measures,
Right.
you find rather obscure names.
Yes.
And the names might sound fantastic. Americans for Prosperity. Well, that's a nice ideal. I mean, I don't know too many Americans that aren't for prosperity, but that's just a name, and it doesn't really reflect where that organization is.
Yeah.
What can we do so that, hey, we really find out where is this funding really coming from?
Well, there are two things that we can do. Folks might remember in the fall elections of 2012, there was this secret money that came into California from an Arizona group that was called Americans for Responsible Leadership. And
Same organization as Americans for Prosperity.
yeah, well, and it turns out it's the same network of organizations. And my staff and I did some research into this at Common Cause and saw that the chief operative of this group was a guy named Sean Noble, who I recognized as someone who had worked for the Koch brothers and Koch Industries. So in this instance, we were able to file a complaint at the Fair Political Practices Commission. They moved on it aggressively and conducted an audit, and 10 months after the election, there was a record fine of $1.3 million assessed to these two front groups for the Koch brothers for laundering their money through a series of different nonprofit groups to conceal the true source.
But in the meantime, they had influenced an election.
That's right.
And the election was done. And so, proactively, is there anything that can be done beforehand to reveal who is actually behind these particular causes?
Yeah, two things. First of all, the legislature just passed legislation that Common Cause and the Fair Political Practices Commission helped draft to require any group that's receiving funds to disclose who their donors are. So that will help with the shell game and the money laundering. But then the second thing that the next Secretary of State could do is take that information that lives in this arcane database in the Secretary of State's office and put it into the voter's guide, so that when you're making your voting decisions, it would be there. And this gets back to my idea of turning that guide into an electronic tool, because right now, as a newsprint document, it gets sent to the printer 8-10 weeks before the election.
Right.
But if it's an electronic document, we could be updating it every 24 hours, and if $11 million comes in from a group, you know, that nobody's ever heard of, we could disclose that right there, and you could click a link and see all the donors behind that group and keep drilling down until you get to the true source of funds.
Now, will you really be able to do that? Because a lot of these organizations maintain anonymity for their particular donors.
Right. And that's what this law that was just signed into effect by Governor Jerry Brown last week, SB 27, will prevent.
Good.
Is it will require any group that's spending money on California elections to divulge who their donors are. So we fixed that problem from a legal point of view. Now we just need the Secretary of State to put that information in front of voters, and that's what I'm committed to doing.
So the key
elected.
thing is make the voter guide a living document that gets updated more often than just once.
Yep.
And make that information available to people to help them decide which way to vote.
Yeah, so this is something we can do, and it's something that the nonprofit community where I've worked has been doing for 20 years. There are nonprofit groups like maplight.org, like the Center for Responsive Politics, that has this expertise in how to unmask these donations and present them, and we can take that methodology and put it in the official voter's guide so that every voter has a chance to see that.
That would certainly help a whole lot, because I have to tell you, it is so confusing to find out who's behind anything
Yeah,
these days.
and especially when everybody's name is so innocuous. You know,
Right.
Californians for motherhood and voting rights and apple pie. Well, who is that really?
That's
right?
exactly
But,
right.
but if you can look at the money,
Yeah.
it tells you, is that a tobacco company? Is that a bank? Is that a pharmaceutical company? Who really is that hiding behind that nice-sounding name?
Do you have any idea of how long it might take to implement something like this?
Well, from the folks that I've talked to in Silicon Valley in the nonprofit world, they believe that it could be built in 1 to 2 years. So it's not an overwhelmingly difficult project, technologically speaking. The challenge is navigating the state's bureaucracy to get that put in place quickly. And that's where what we really need is a Secretary of State that has managerial skills, which quite frankly, you're not learning in the state legislature. And we've had 3 termed out state senators in a row serving as our secretaries of state. Good people, smart people, that they know how to push policies through, but they don't know how to build things and implement things. And that's where I think I can bring a different set of experiences coming from my management background in the nonprofit sector.
That almost brings me to another topic of something that we implemented a little less recently, but recently. All of this is a kind of an effect, an indirect effect of term limits. And term limits were implemented not that long ago.
Yeah.
What do you think of the need for term limits in the legislature and the state senate in California?
Well, I think it's particularly problematic the way we've done it in California for a couple of reasons. One is, unlike many other states that have term limits, we have a lifetime ban here. Well, once you've served your term in the state legislature, I think one thing minimally we could look at is going, okay, your term's limited for now, but if you spend 4 years doing something else, maybe you could come back and run again. Look at how effective Jerry Brown has been, having served once as governor, but then spending some time as mayor of Oakland, as Attorney General. So I think that might be a more healthy way to look at things. And then, you know, the other problem that we have is we have term limits for the legislature, but not for Congress. So you get many skilled legislators who get kicked out of the legislature, and they have nowhere to go. Unfortunately, they either become a lobbyist, or they sort of look for some other office that they can occupy while they're waiting for a congressional seat to open up. So, you know, I've never been a big fan of term limits, but in particular, the way that we've implemented it here in California, I think is even worse than other states that have done it.
Yeah, I think one of the original intents of term limits was to prevent people from becoming career politicians.
Right.
And it hasn't really done that, has it?
No, no, not at all. It's just caused them to play musical chairs.
Right, exactly
And
right.
so we're not necessarily bringing fresh blood and new ideas into the system. We're just shifting around the same career politicians.
And the other unintended consequence is that positions that are a little bit more technical, such as Secretary of State, are now open opportunities for people who have termed out of the legislature, instead of being left to people who really have a background in that particular area.
That's right. You know, and a lot of our constitutional offices statewide are that way. It's not an area where you need the broad expertise of a legislator who knows about dozens, if not hundreds, of issues. You know, our Secretary of State's office, our Comptroller's office, our Treasurer's office, our Insurance Commissioner office, they're fairly specialized offices within the executive branch, where you need, you know, more of a policy nerd, quite frankly, than a career politician, and yet that isn't what our system is delivering us right now.
Unintended consequences always get you.
Yeah.
Let's talk about another change that we made to our elections a few years ago, and that was going to an open primary system.
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on the open primary system, and how has it served or not served California so well?
Well, I think the idea was to make sure that independent voters who aren't affiliated with any particular party could fully participate in our elections. And I think that's a good idea and something that we need to strive towards. Unfortunately, we have not seen so far any increase in voter turnout at the primary level among those independent voters. So it hasn't accomplished that goal. And the thing that concerns me is it leads to two problems. One is you get a lot of gamesmanship among both of the parties trying to figure out how to reduce the number of people running on their side. Because if you get a situation where you have 4 candidates from one party running and 2 candidates from the other, the party with 2 is very likely to be able to send those 2 candidates to the general election, sometimes even if they're the minority party in that district. So
right. That has happened, in fact.
that leads to an unhealthy dynamic of trying to manipulate the field as opposed to encouraging everybody who wants to run for office, which I think would serve voters better. I think it's also been unfortunate for the smaller parties who have faced higher barriers to get on the primary ballot and are eliminated entirely from the November ballot when most people are casting their ballots. So it's led to fewer choices for voters on Election Day. I think we need a system that allows everybody to really express their true preferences on Election Day so that our election system is accurately capturing, you know, the will of the people.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting, but that's not really in the purview of the Secretary of State. That's more a legislative type of a
That's
decision.
right. Or ultimately, it might be something that the people need to decide through a constitutional amendment.
Another initiative.
Yeah,
Right.
That may happen. We'll see.
That may happen. Very good. Any other parting thoughts that you'd like to leave with us? Things that you see as very important for the future of California?
Well, I think the biggest thing that we're facing from trying to get more people to vote, trying to get our elections to function properly, is just the overwhelming role of money in politics, which we've talked about, but what we haven't talked about is how the Roberts Court just seems determined to prevent us from solving it.
So tell us about those 2 decisions, the Citizens United and then the
McCutcheon one came down
decision.
Recently, and there's been a series of them, although these have been the most prominent. So the Citizens United ruling struck down a law that banned corporations and labor unions from spending an unlimited amount of money on these independent ads attacking or supporting a candidate for office. And that really opened up the floodgates to unlimited amounts of money in our political process. It led the way to create these so-called super PACs that presidential candidates first used, and now we're seeing at every level where you know, the Koch brothers can spend $400 million influencing the political process and really overwhelm the voices of ordinary people. So we need to find a way to push back against this. And the good news is that there's a growing movement in the country to do that, even though it's an incredibly daunting process to overrule a Supreme Court ruling. The way you need to do that is...
How do you see us overturning that or dealing with that?
Well, one way is the court personnel could change, and the court could, in 10 or 20 years, have a new case and reach a different conclusion. You know, that this court overturned a previous precedent
Correct.
where it upheld some campaign finance laws. So that could happen again. But the
That's
thing
a long process.
That's a long process, and it's somewhat out of the hands of regular people. So the thing that we can demand right now is a constitutional amendment that would overturn the courts on this. This is how we got rid of the poll tax. This is how we gave women the right to vote. This is how we won the right to vote for U.S. senators, was through amending the U.S. Constitution, which we've done 27 times in our history. It requires 2/3 of both houses of Congress to propose an amendment and 3/4 of the states. So it's not something that you take on lightly.
No.
But I think we have reached a point where the threat to our democracy is so severe that we need to take this on. And the movement that I was leading when I was at Common Cause was to allow voters to actually speak about this directly through the ballot box. And we placed questions on the ballot in Los Angeles and San Francisco that called upon Congress to pass a constitutional amendment that would overturn the Supreme Court and its rulings that say that corporations are people and that unlimited campaign spending is free speech, which most of us don't believe, right?
Right.
So these
Although a lot of people are opposed to that, the politicians, the congressmen in Washington got there through that mechanism.
That's
though.
right.
And that's the difficulty.
That's the challenge and it's the same type of challenge we faced with redistricting reform, is the incumbents don't want to change the rules that
Right.
put them in place. But the good news is when voters have been speaking out, Congress is starting to listen. So these ballot measures in San Francisco and LA, they passed by margins of greater than 3-1. And Congress is starting to pay attention. On June 3rd, the day we hold our primary election, the U.S. Senate Rules Committee will hold a hearing on this constitutional amendment, and Harry Reid has promised to vote on it on the floor of the U.S. Senate this summer. So they are beginning to wake up and to listen. I'm calling for a statewide vote here in California to give every voter a chance to speak out directly on this issue. Senator Ted Lieu and Senator Hannibeth Jackson have introduced a bill to do that, and so we may have a chance to have the entire population of California speaking out this November, demanding Congress take action. And that's a more powerful statement than a legislative resolution or a postcard drive or phone calls or newspaper editorials. It's going to take that type of thing to create the extraordinary level of public pressure that we're going to need to see to force Congress to act on this.
Well, thank you for providing some hope.
Yeah,
Some
well,
hope
we need
at
it.
least that we can overturn
The stakes
that.
are simply too high to give up hope,
That's
I
right.
think. When you look at what's going on with our economy, when you look at what's going on with our environment, it does make you cynical. It's a very serious situation, and our choices are either to give up or to persevere and decide that we're going to do something about it. And
Fight back.
you know, we've seen previous generations of America deal with bigger problems than this, whether it was, you know, the Nazis in World War II or winning the Civil Rights Act or you know, the Founding Fathers who had to, you know, fight for their freedom against the king. We've had great struggles in our country, bigger problems than this, and I think we're up to this task as well, and I'm sure not going to give up until we've succeeded.
I like having you on the side of fighting this battle. That's fantastic. Thank you so much for being with us, Mr. Cressman. Delightful having you here, and best of luck. To our viewers, I would say one more important thing, and I'm sure that you'll totally agree with this. Tuesday, June 3rd,
Yes.
get out and vote. If you haven't voted already, make sure you vote on June 3rd. Projections I've seen for possible voter turnout in the June primary are very low. Your vote matters that much more.
That's
if
right.
you vote on June 3rd. So
That's right, and bring along a couple friends.
bring along a few friends, so get the vote out on June 3rd. Thank you again, and to all of our viewers, thank you for joining us, and until next time, good night.